The Mustang and the Plains. The wind, a constant whispering companion, tugged at Elara's braids as Spirit's hooves drummed a rhythmic cadence across the sun-baked earth. They were a blur of motion, a streak of wild energy against the endless expanse of the plains. Spirit, a stallion the color of a stormy sky, snorted, his mane a dark banner whipping in the breeze. Elara, astride him without a saddle, felt the ripple of his muscles beneath her thighs. A primal connection that needed no reins, no bit. Her hands rested lightly on his neck, guiding him with an unspoken understanding. The horizon stretched, an unbroken promise of freedom, and Elara drank it in, her spirit as untamed as the land itself. She navigated the sparse sagebrush and occasional rocky outcrops with an instinctive grace, her gaze sharp, missing nothing. A hawk circled high above, a tiny speck against the vast blue, mirroring her own solitary journey. Miles away, hidden amongst a cluster of ancient cottonwoods bordering a dry creek bed, Jedediah watched. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, were narrowed against the glare, but his focus was absolute. He saw the girl and the horse not as two separate entities, but as one fierce, unyielding spirit. He'd observed her for weeks, a phantom presence on these plains, always moving, always free. Most women he'd encountered were tethered to hearth or husband, their ambitions neatly folded away. Elara was different. She moved, with a purpose he couldn't quite decipher, a wildness that resonated deep within him, a silent challenge to the orderly world he usually inhabited. He admired her courage, the way she faced the vast, indifferent landscape with such resolute independence. But there was a fragility, too, a vulnerability that pricked at something he usually kept well guarded. He saw the way she scanned the horizon not with fear, but with an unwavering vigilance, a constant readiness for whatever came. A fleeting thought crossed his mind. She was like a wild bird, beautiful and resilient, but always susceptible to the hunter's snare. As dusk began to paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, Elara slowed Spirit to a walk. She dismounted near a cluster of stunted pines, their needles fragrant in the cooling air. With practiced movements, she unsaddled the makeshift pack from Spirit's back, revealing a worn blanket and a small cooking pot. She gathered dry branches, her hands swift and efficient, and soon a small fire crackled, casting dancing shadows against the encroaching darkness. Spirit grazed nearby, a dark silhouette against the last vestiges of twilight. Elara hummed a tuneless melody, her voice soft, carrying barely beyond the immediate circle of warmth. She ate a simple meal of dried jerky and hardtack, her eyes fixed on the constellations now beginning to pinprick the velvet sky. The solitude didn't weigh on her. It was her chosen companion, a comforting silence broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. She was a woman alone, but not lonely, the vastness of the plains her only witness. She pulled her blanket tighter, unaware of the two shadows that detached themselves from the deeper gloom beyond the pines, their movements silent, predatory. Shadows on the horizon. The dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of bruised peach and violet, but Elara's usual morning ritual of greeting the sun was shattered by a chilling absence. Her hand, reaching for Spirit's familiar mane, met only cool air and the scent of damp earth. A cold dread seeped into her bones. Spirit was gone. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she scanned the small makeshift corral. The flimsy rope gate was ripped from its stakes, lying uselessly on the ground. Anger, sharp and immediate, replaced the dread. No one took her horse, not and lived to boast about it. She found the tracks easily enough, clear impressions of hooves and heavy boots leading west, towards the jagged peaks known to harbor the likes of Rattlesnake Jake. Her jaw tightened. She knew his reputation. A petty tyrant with a penchant for flashy bandanas and an even flashier temper. Hours later, the sun beat down mercilessly, raising dust devils that danced across the barren landscape. Elara, following the ever-clearer tracks, topped a rise and saw them, a cluster of disheveled tents and a sputtering campfire, smoke curling lazily into the still air. And there, picketed amongst a half-dozen scruffy ponies, was Spirit, her coat gleaming dully in the harsh light. A snarl escaped Elara's lips. She crept closer, a weathered rifle clutched in her hands, her movements as silent as a desert cat. A figure emerged from one of the tents, stretching, then spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. It was Jake, unmistakable with his gaudy red scarf and the menacing gleam in his eye. He walked over to Spirit, stroking her neck with a proprietary air that made Elara's blood boil. "Thought you could just take what's mine, did you, you mangy cur?" Elara's voice, though low, cut through the morning stillness like a whip. Jake spun around, his hand instinctively going for the revolver holstered at his hip. His eyes, small and dark, narrowed as he took in her determined stance, the rifle leveled steadily at his chest. Well, what have we here? A little desert rose with thorns, eh?" He grinned, a nasty flash of yellowed teeth. "That's a fine horse, little lady. Too fine for a lone woman." Before Elara could reply, 2 other men emerged from the tents, their expressions ranging from sleepy confusion to predatory interest. The odds had just tipped decisively against her. "Drop the rifle, sweetheart," Jake commanded, his voice oozing false charm. "No need for anyone to get hurt." Elara hesitated, weighing her options. 3 against 1, and they were armed. She lowered the rifle slowly, her eyes never leaving Jake's. "Give me back my horse." Jake laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Not a chance. She's mine now." He gestured to his men. "Tie her up. She's got spirit, this one. Might be useful." Rough hands seized her, twisting her arms behind her back. Elara struggled, kicking and biting, but they were too many, too strong. They bound her wrists tightly, then her ankles, and dragged her unceremoniously to a thick wooden post that served as the center of their camp. As the rough rope chafed against her skin, Elara glared at Jake, who stood over her, a triumphant smirk on his face. "You think this changes anything?" she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "You've just made a very powerful enemy." Jake merely chuckled, unwrapping a piece of jerky. "Plenty of enemies in this world, little bird. You'll just be another one to forget." But Elara knew he wouldn't forget her, not after this. The humiliation burned, but beneath it, a cold, hard resolve began to set like concrete. Her anger, usually a hot flame, now simmered with a controlled intensity. She watched Spirit, tied just out of reach, and a silent promise formed in her heart. Jake had made a mistake, and he was about to learn just how costly it would be. The lone tracker. The dust, disturbed by more than just the wind, spoke volumes to Jedediah. He dismounted, his gaze sweeping the uneven ground. A broken wooden slat from a water trough lay splintered, an unnatural casualty. Then, the almost imperceptible scuff marks where a struggle had taken place, leading to a wider, deeper set of prints, heavier boots than Elara's, in too many of them. His jaw tightened. He knelt, fingers brushing the faint indentations. Elara's small, distinctive boot print was there, a single, hurried impression, then nothing. Only the larger, more numerous tracks of men and horses heading eastward. And among them, unmistakably, the familiar hoofprint of Elara's mare, a mare he'd helped her break just last spring. The stolen horse, the forced departure. His resolve solidified, a cold, hard knot in his gut. The canyons were a labyrinth of sun-baked rock and shifting shadows. Jedediah navigated them with the silent grace of a predator, his eyes constantly scanning, interpreting every broken twig, every dislodged pebble. The air grew thin and hot, smelling of parched earth and distant sage. Rattlesnake Jake's gang wasn't subtle. Their trail, though winding and often obscured by the harsh terrain, was still discernible to Jedediah's trained eye. He noted where a rock had been recently disturbed, indicating a clumsy footfall. He saw the faint, almost invisible scuff of a saddlebag dragging against a low-hanging branch, leaving a trace of canvas fiber. He pictured Elara, perhaps bound, certainly defiant, in the midst of these brutes. The thought spurred him onward, ignoring the growing fatigue in his own muscles. Days bled into each other, marked only by the shifting light and the dwindling water in his canteen. The canyons deepened, their walls rising like ancient giants, the silence broken only by the wind's mournful sigh and the rhythmic creak of his saddle. He found their discarded campfire, a ring of blackened stones and cold ashes. He dismounted, inspecting the remnants. The embers were less than a day old. He spotted a discarded tin cup, crudely fashioned from an old can, Jake's mark if he ever needed more proof. They were close. Jedediah scaled a sheer rock face, finding purchase in tiny fissures and outcroppings. From the summit, he surveyed the desolate landscape. Below, nestled in a bowl-shaped depression, he saw it. A cluster of makeshift shelters, a faint wisp of smoke curling lazily from a central fire. Horses were tethered in a crude corral, Rattlesnake Jake's camp. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the western sky in hues of orange and purple. The timing was crucial. He couldn't afford to blunder in. He studied the layout, the paths in and out, the placement of sentries, if any. His gaze lingered on the figures moving about the camp, trying to discern Elara among them. He needed a plan, one that minimized bloodshed but ensured her freedom. This wasn't about vengeance, it was about restitution, about righting a profound wrong. He would wait for darkness, for the veil of night to offer its silent protection. A glimmer of hope. The scent of stale campfire smoke and unwashed bodies clung to the air, thick and cloying. Jedediah, a shadow among shadows, moved with the quiet grace of a desert cat, his boots barely disturbing the loose shale. He'd followed the tracks for days, a relentless pursuit fueled by a quiet conviction. Now, below him, nestled in a shallow ravine, was the outlaw camp. A flickering fire cast dancing silhouettes against the rough canvas of makeshift tents. He counted 8 men, their voices a low rumble in the stillness of the night. Then he saw her. Tied to a sturdy mesquite tree, a figure was slumped, head bowed. Even from this distance, Elara's defiant spirit seemed to emanate from her stillness. He recognized the way her shoulders were set, the almost imperceptible tremor that spoke not of fear, but of a fierce, contained anger. His gut clenched. The sight of her, bound and vulnerable, ignited a cold, steady fury in him. His hand instinctively went to the worn leather of his lasso, its familiar weight a comfort. Rattlesnake Jake, a broad-shouldered brute with a sneering mouth, stood over her, a half-empty bottle clutched in one hand, his words slurred and menacing. He prodded her with his boot, a cruel smile twisting his lips. Elara didn't flinch, didn't utter a sound. Her silence, Jedediah knew, was a far more potent weapon than any scream. Jedediah pulled back, his eyes scanning the camp. 2 sentries, bored and likely drunk, leaned against a rock formation, their rifles resting carelessly beside them. The main group was clustered around the fire, their attention fixed on Jake's pathetic display of dominance. This was his chance. He unwound his lasso, the supple rope uncoiling with a whisper that only he could hear. His mind worked with the precision of a seasoned tracker. He spotted a dead, brittle tree limb, thick as a man's thigh, jutting out precariously from the cliff face directly above the sentries. A perfect target. With a practiced flick of his wrist, the loop soared through the air, a silent, deadly arc against a star-dusted sky. It settled perfectly around the limb, cinching tight. He gave a sharp tug, testing its hold. The wood groaned, a low, ominous sound. Then, with a mighty heave, he pulled. The crack was deafening, echoing through the ravine like a gunshot. The limb splintered, tearing free from the cliff with a shower of dust and small rocks, plummeting to the ground with a resounding crash that sent birds scattering from their roosts. Chaos erupted. The two sentries yelped, scrambling away from the falling debris, their rifles forgotten. The men by the fire sprang to their feet, shouting, their hands instinctively going for their weapons. "What in the blazes was that?" Jake roared, momentarily forgetting Elara. His voice, usually so confident, was laced with genuine alarm. Under the cover of their frantic shouts and the lingering cloud of dust, Jedediah moved. He descended the slope in a blur of controlled motion, his boots finding purchase on impossible footholds. His eyes, however, remained fixed on Elara. He reached her in seconds, a silent wraith in the swirling confusion. Her eyes, wide and startled, met his. There was no recognition, only a flicker of surprise, quickly replaced by a steely resolve. His hand, quick and precise, drew a knife from his belt. The glint of steel was barely perceptible in the dim light. Without a word, he began to saw through the thick ropes binding her wrists. The rough fibers parted with a quiet rasp, a sound drowned out by the shouts and curses of the outlaws, trying to make sense of the sudden, inexplicable noise. The unspoken question. The clatter of his spurs against the sun-baked earth was the only sound Jedediah made as he closed the distance. Dust devils danced around his boots, momentarily obscuring his path, but his gaze remained fixed. Elara, bound to the gnarled mesquite, her silhouette stark against the bruised horizon, seemed to be holding her breath. When he was but a few paces away, the wind died, and their eyes met. Hers were the color of storm clouds, simmering with defiance and an intelligence that belied her predicament. In their depths, he saw a silent question, sharp and direct, a flicker of hope warring with the grim expectation of a fate she knew all too well. It wasn't a plea for mercy. Elara wasn't one for begging. It was an inquiry, a challenge. "What now, cowboy?" Jedediah halted. The air crackled with unspoken tension, thick and heavy like the approaching storm. He saw the faint tremor in her jaw, the way her shoulders were still squared despite the rope biting into her wrists. She wasn't broken, not yet, and something in that unbroken spirit resonated with a deep, almost forgotten part of him. He'd seen plenty of captured women, their eyes vacant with resignation. Elara's were anything but. They burned. His hand instinctively went to the hilt of his bowie knife, a familiar weight against his palm. The usual procedure was clear. Secure the prisoner, deliver them to the nearest marshal, collect the bounty. It was a straightforward path, one he'd trod countless times. But as he looked into Elara's unwavering gaze, that path seemed to splinter. A different kind of rescue began to form in his mind, one that had nothing to do with chains or courtrooms. He saw the glint of the sun on the silver buckle of her belt, the intricate stitching on her worn leather vest, details that spoke of a life lived by her own rules, however harsh. He imagined the feel of the rough rope against her skin, the confinement, the indignity of it. To simply cut her loose and walk away would be an act of defiance against the very system he sometimes upheld. To take her in would be to extinguish that spark he saw in her eyes. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant caw of a crow. Elara didn't flinch, didn't break eye contact. She simply waited, her breath shallow, her posture a testament to an unyielding will. She didn't know what he was thinking, but she understood the weight of the moment. Her future, perhaps her very life, hinged on the next beat of his heart, the next twitch of his hand. Jedediah's fingers tightened on the knife. The choice was stark, a fork in the dusty road. One path led to duty, to order, to the predictable outcome. The other was uncharted, dangerous, and whispered of a freedom he rarely afforded himself, let alone others. The heat of the sun beat down on his hat, but a chill wind seemed to sweep through his thoughts. He met her gaze, and a silent pact, unformed and risky, began to take shape between them. With a fluid motion, he drew the knife. The cut rope. The coarse hemp gouged Elara's wrists, a constant, grating reminder of her confinement. The air in the cramped, shadowed cellar hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and congealed apprehension. Jedediah loomed over her, his silhouette a stark, unyielding monolith against the meager light filtering from the small, barred window. His face, usually a chiseled mask of resolve, was unreadable in the gloom. Without a word, he drew a glinting bowie knife. The blade, honed to a surgical keenness, snared a sliver of light, sending a tremor through Elara. Her breath caught, bracing for a more sinister application of the steel. Instead, with a fluid, almost delicate precision, he knelt. The honed edge kissed the thick ropes binding her wrists. A single, decisive cut, and the fibers parted with a soft thwip. Before she could fully register the sudden liberation, he moved to her ankles, repeating the action with identical swiftness. The cords fell away, leaving faint scarlet wheals on her skin. Elara flexed her fingers, blood surging back in a tingling rush. Her muscles, stiff from prolonged immobility, shrieked in protest as she slowly levered herself upright. She stared at him, bewildered, her mind scrambling to decipher this unexpected act. Was this some new, more insidious game? A test of her compliance, or perhaps a prelude to an escape he intended to orchestrate? Jedediah's gaze, typically so direct, seemed to bore into her, seeking something elusive. His voice, when it finally broke the silence, was a low murmur, barely disturbing the stillness of the cellar. "Your choice, Elara." His eyes flickered to the narrow window, then back to her. "Run, fight, or come with me. You decide." The words hung in the air, weighted with unspoken significance, not an order, not even a suggestion, a genuine, unencumbered offering. The implication struck her with the force of a physical blow, a sudden, staggering realization. He wasn't dictating her path. He was presenting her with the raw, untamed freedom she cherished above all else. He trusted her. Not just with her life, but with her very autonomy. A surge of power, exhilarating and terrifying, coursed through her veins. It wasn't the fleeting triumph of outsmarting a captor, but the deeper, more resonant strength of being acknowledged, respected. The choice was truly hers. No manipulation, no hidden agenda, just the stark reality of three distinct paths, laid out by a man who had every reason to control her. She rubbed her wrists, feeling the returning circulation, the phantom pressure of the ropes receding. The scent of damp earth now seemed less confining, the shadows less menacing. She met his unwavering gaze, a flicker of something new passing between them, a silent understanding, a shared moment of profound trust forged in the crucible of uncertain circumstances. The world outside the cellar, fraught with danger and unknown perils, suddenly felt less daunting. The path ahead, whatever she chose, was now unequivocally her own. Leading the charge. Elara's eyes, bright with a fire Jedediah hadn't seen since the moment he cut her ropes, scanned the dusty clearing. A wild grin, almost feral, spread across her face, transforming her features from weary defiance to something truly dangerous. "All right, Jedediah," she declared, her voice a low, excited murmur. "Here's how we get spirit back." Jedediah, leaning against a gnarled mesquite tree, simply watched her. His face remained a stoic mask, but his gaze, sharp and unwavering, conveyed a silent agreement, a quiet trust. He hadn't asked for details, hadn't questioned her sudden authority. He simply waited, his hand instinctively resting on the worn hilt of his revolver. "Jake's a coward," Elara continued, tracing a diagram in the dirt with the toe of her boot. "He likes to think he's clever, but he's predictable. He'll keep spirit tied tight, probably close to his own tent, thinking no one would dare approach." She paused, a glint in her eye. "But he underestimates what a desperate woman and a man who keeps his word can do." Her plan unfurled, a tapestry woven of shadows, distraction, and the innate understanding of human weakness. Jedediah listened, occasionally offering a curt nod or a slight shift in his posture that indicated comprehension. There was no need for lengthy explanations. Elara's logic was as sharp as a newly honed blade. Under the cloak of the deepening twilight, a hush fell over the outlaw camp. The air grew cooler, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and unwashed bodies. Elara moved first, a wraith in the gathering gloom, her movements fluid and silent. Jedediah followed, a solid shadow, his senses alert to every rustle of dry leaves, every distant murmur. Her first act was simple, yet effective. A strategically placed pebble, kicked with deceptive force, clattered against a stack of tin cans near the makeshift kitchen. The sudden noise, amplified in the quiet evening, drew the attention of the two outlaws guarding the camp's perimeter. Curses and grumbles followed as they investigated the disturbance, their backs now turned to Jake's tent. Jedediah used a momentary diversion. Moving with the speed and grace of a mountain cat, he disarmed one of the distracted guards in a swift, brutal motion, the glint of a knife in the moonlight, the only warning before the man crumpled silently. The second guard, still peering into the darkness, never heard his companion fall. Meanwhile, Elara, having circled wide, was already at the edge of Jake's tent. The stallion, Spirit, was indeed tethered nearby, his magnificent coat, a dark silhouette against the pale canvas. Spirit nickered softly, a low rumble of recognition as Elara approached. She pressed her hand against his warm flank, a silent promise of freedom. The sounds of a struggle, brief and muffled, finally reached Jake. He emerged from his tent, bleary-eyed and clutching a pistol, just as Elara was untying Spirit's lead. "What in the blazes?" he began, his voice thick with sleep and confusion. Jedediah materialized from the shadows, a formidable presence. His revolver, now drawn, was aimed squarely at Jake's chest. "Drop it, Jake," he commanded, his voice a low growl that carried the weight of unyielding resolve. Rattlesnake Jake, caught off guard, hesitated. His eyes darted between Jedediah's unblinking stare and Elara, who was now swinging herself onto Spirit's back. The stallion, sensing the shift in dynamics, pawed the ground impatiently. Jake's bluster faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. He wasn't just facing an escaped prisoner and a drifter. He was facing a unified front, a force he had severely underestimated. "You think you can just waltz in here?" Jake stammered, his voice cracking, but the sight of Jedediah's steady aim quickly quelled any further defiance. With a frustrated grunt, he let the pistol clatter to the ground. Elara, perched atop Spirit, looked down at Jake, her wild grin back in full force. "We didn't waltz, Jake," she corrected, her eyes sparkling with triumph. "We rode." With a triumphant whinny, Spirit turned and galloped into the night, Elara a fierce, exultant figure on his back. Jedediah, after a final, lingering look at the defeated Rattlesnake Jake, turned and melted back into the darkness, a quiet sentinel following the thundering hooves of freedom. Riding into the sunrise. The dawn breeze, still cool from the night, ruffled Elara's hair as she watched Jedediah lead Spirit towards her. The mare's ears twitched, her dark eyes finding Elara's across the short distance. A soft whicker escaped Spirit's throat, a sound of recognition and relief that went straight to Elara's heart. She met the horse halfway, burying her face in the warm, familiar mane. The scent of dust and freedom filled her lungs, a stark contrast to the stale air of the outlaw camp. Spirit nudged her hand, a gentle demand for affection, and Elara responded with a fierce hug, murmuring reassurances into her coat. The saddle, still bearing the marks of the struggle, felt like a promise of new beginnings. Jedediah watched, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. He said nothing, simply allowing Elara her moment of reunion. When she finally turned, her eyes bright with unshed tears and a renewed spark of defiance, He was already mounted on his own sturdy roan. "Ready?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Elara nodded, swinging herself into Spirit's saddle with practiced ease. The leather creaked under her weight, a comforting sound. She glanced at the horizon, where the first fingers of light were painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. They rode side by side, not speaking, but the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the rhythmic thud of hooves on the dusty trail, the rustle of the wind through the sparse prairie grass, and the unspoken understanding that had bloomed between them in the chaos of the past day. The sun climbed higher, casting long, dancing shadows behind them. The air grew warmer, shedding the night's chill, mirroring the thawing within Elara's own chest. She stole a glance at Jedediah. His profile was etched against the vibrant backdrop of the sky, stoic and unreadable as ever, yet she saw something different now. A quiet strength, yes, but also a flicker of something akin to companionship. He caught her looking and turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting hers. There was no judgment, no demand, just a steady acknowledgement. "They won't be bothering anyone else," Jedediah said, his voice cutting through the quiet. It wasn't a question but a statement of closure. Elara nodded. "No, they won't." A shiver, not of fear but of lingering adrenaline, traced its way down her spine. "Thank you, Jedediah." He didn't reply immediately, his eyes fixed on the distant plains. "You handled yourself well." It was high praise, coming from him. A small smile played on Elara's lips. "I had a good teacher, in a manner of speaking." She thought of the countless times she'd had to fend for herself, the lessons learned in the harsh school of the frontier. But she also thought of the unexpected alliance with Jedediah, the way he'd offered help without demanding submission. "Some things," Jedediah finally said, his gaze returning to her, "you can't teach. They're just in you." The words hung in the air, a quiet affirmation of her resilience, her spirit. Elara felt a warmth spread through her, a sense of being truly seen, truly valued, for the first time in a long while. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time she didn't feel entirely alone on it. The sun, now fully risen, cast its golden light over them, two solitary figures riding into a new day, bound by a shared past and an unfolding future. The gift of freedom. The rope, a rough hempen thing, lay coiled at her feet, a silent testament to her sudden liberty. Elara stared at it, a curious numbness settling over her. She'd expected a chase, a demand, perhaps even a grudging agreement to a shared journey. Instead, Jedediah had simply cut her loose. Not just the physical bonds, but the unspoken ones she'd assumed were forming between them. The dust motes danced in the afternoon sun, filtering through the wagon's canvas, illuminating the intricate weave of the rope. It wasn't a trick. He hadn't hidden the knife, ready to retrieve her if she strayed too far. He'd merely set her free. The sheer audacity of it, the quiet finality of the act, resonated deep within her. It wasn't a test of loyalty, nor an invitation to return. It was a recognition. Her mind replayed the moment, the glint of steel, the sharp snap of severing fibers, Jedediah's unreadable gaze. He hadn't said a word, hadn't pleaded or cajoled. He had simply acted, his stoic face betraying nothing. And in that silence, Elara finally understood. This wasn't about him asserting control, not even a benevolent kind. It was about acknowledging her, Elara, as a being with an innate right to choose her own path. A tremor, not of fear, but of profound realization, ran through her. She, who had chafed under every saddle, every expectation, every attempt to rein her in, had just been granted the ultimate affirmation of her spirit. Jedediah hadn't sought to possess her, or even guide her. He had seen her fierce independence, her unyielding desire for autonomy, and he had honored it. He had presented her with the stark, beautiful, terrifying truth. The choice was hers alone. The wind, A familiar companion whispered through the sparse grass outside, carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant pine. It felt different now, no longer a symbol of her longing, but a tangible expression of her reality. She could walk away, vanish into the vast, indifferent landscape, or she could stay. The choice was hers, completely and irrevocably. A warmth, slow and steady, began to spread through her chest. It wasn't the fleeting exhilaration of escape, but something deeper, more sustaining. This was a gift unlike any she had ever received. Not a bauble, not protection, but the precious weight of self-determination. He hadn't just cut a rope. He had severed the invisible threads of expectation that bound so many women in this unforgiving world. He had seen her, truly seen her, and responded not with an attempt to possess, but with an act of profound respect. Her gaze drifted to the open flap of the wagon, then beyond it, to the endless horizon. The dust motes still danced, but now they seemed to shimmer with possibility. Her spirit, long caged by circumstance and expectation, felt an unprecedented lightness. It soared, not away from Jedediah, but in a freedom born of his unique understanding. He hadn't sought to capture her wildness. He had simply ensured she could remain untamed, and in that quiet, unassuming gesture, Jedediah had given her everything. The choice, the wilderness, the untrammeled path, all were hers for the taking.